holidays. Hi, I'm Al Paul, one of the support analysts. Probably have talked to most of you over the past few years, and I'm very pleased to be here today to present our final webinar of the calendar year, in which we address next year and how to begin setting ourselves up for next year. We are recording this session today. Thankfully, I do not have a webcam, but the presentation itself, including audio, will be posted on the internet. You can link to it from our community pages. You see the address here, community.schoollogic.com. And we will be running the audio on mute today. If you have a question, please email me after the webinar. You can see my email address on this slide as well. The website address is much bigger than my email address. It must be more important. For our display purposes today, we will be running Schoologic 4.3.22, which should be out before Christmas. And in fact, it should be out in the next couple days. Before we get started, let's talk a little bit about Schoologic and SIRS. Everyone listening to me right now falls into one of three groups. You are running Schoologic by itself, you are running SIRS by itself, or you're running some combination of the two, which, around our house, we call, you guys, hybrids. Everything you see me do today is going to be in Schoologic. That's the side of the house that I came up in, I'm more schooled in, more experienced with, and web-based is where this whole thing is evolving at whatever speed gets us there. Generally, the concepts that I will talk about today are valid whether you're running SIRS or you're running Schoologic. Although, clearly, many of the screens in the areas I'm going to explore are quite different between the two. If you're a hybrid school, my advice is you will want to create next year in Schoologic, because if you create it in SIRS, Schoologic's not going to like that down the road. Once you have next year created and you've started these setup steps that you're going to see me doing, things like setting up individual track dates, setting up the school calendar, setting up students in terms of next year tracks, grade statuses. If I were a hybrid school, whichever side of the house I started that work in, I'd continue my preparations there. And remember, we're not talking about scheduling. We're just talking about setting ourselves up for the scheduling process. Think about this. Suppose you support multiple schools. It's tough to provide consistent answers to people when half of them want to do tracks, grades, and statuses in SIRS, and the other half want to do tracks, grades, and statuses in Schoologic. If it were me, once I had next year created in Schoologic, I would do all my subsequent preparations in either one or the other. I'd do all my preparations on the same side of the house. Now, usually at this point in these webinars, I am going to give you a little outline of what we're going to discuss. This time around, I want to begin by telling you what we are not going to discuss. We are not going to discuss actually scheduling your students for 2015-2016. An hour from now, you are not going to know each and every step to formulate a school schedule. What we are going to discuss is setting yourself up to create that schedule. What are some of the things you can do this month and in January to get yourself into good position to create schedules? In other words, if this were basketball, today's presentation would not be so much about your power forward slamming the ball home for 2 points as it would be about setting the picks, the ball screens, and cutting your backside forward off of those to get her free to get the pass and hit a bunny. Today is about setup. And I hope to throw in some troubleshooting tips as we go along. So, where does it all start? Well, it starts with actually creating next year. You're going to see me create next year in a few minutes. That is the step which creates our next year tracks, and a minute after you do that, you actually create the master boards in which you will create next year's schedule. Since the very first thing which Create Next Year does is create your next year tracks, let's start by examining our current tracks. Okay, great. We are logged in here to Schoologic as a middle school person. And as a middle school person, we happen to be a principal today. And you can see here on the tracks screen that the middle school has a separate track for each of the grade levels, 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade. And then there's this business where I've got PY, PY, PY. Well, what's that about? Well, first of all, I'll tell you that this is an actual United States School Districts database. Okay? I've run it through the data mixer to mask student and staff names, even school and district names. We protect the guilty as well as the innocent. And what this PY business is it stands for previous year. So this school is one of those places where they have a track for last year, usually for kids that have left. I personally don't know exactly how they're using it, but we're going to keep this in here because it's instructional as we go along. Okay? Now I wanted to start with tracks today because this display will change first and will basically stay changed for the rest of your school year. Frankly, it is one of the only displays outside of next year's scheduling itself which even indicates that something else is going on. The vast majority of your operators will have no visual indication that the next year's scheduling process is in the works. Now, here we see the current 3 tracks, 6, 7, and 8. This school still has these previous year tracks. We're not going to worry about them, but they will be interesting. I guarantee you that later. Okay? When we create next year, the software will create an NYR track for every track that's visible when you run the command. So my advice would be, now would be a good time to delete these tracks you may no longer need. If you let them hang around after you create next year, you'll have twice as many tracks to delete. Really, truly, if we were going to do this on your data before you went any further, I would advise you to make a backup. When you create next year, you are creating a second world. And if you mess something up early on in that, it's nice to be able to go back and start over. A word of caution, however. Remember, when you restore from backup, you will lose not only whatever work you've been doing, you will lose whatever work other people have done in Schoologic or in SIRS since you made the backup. This applies to all of your buildings, because remember, we're all in one single SQL database. So if you are the guidance counselor or the building principal at a specific building and you're working on next year, remember, you undoubtedly have other staff members both in your building and in other buildings working in current year, and they're working and saving stuff. So keep that in mind. Now fortunately, there is an attractive alternative to restoring everything from backup. You could simply delete the one messed up master board from next year, or better yet, create a new master board. Don't delete the one you don't like until you're actually sure you'll not be needing it. Okay, so if you mess up the tracks, that's one issue. I'm not talking about that, and frankly, tracks are difficult to mess up if you do them right. And I'm going to show you how to do them right. But if you make a mistake in the master board later, don't restore the whole thing from data from the restore. Just go ahead and create another master board and work on the second one. Okay? Now I'm starting to talk about master boards, and that's the actual scheduling process, and I pledged not to get into scheduling, so I apologize for digressing there. However, before I move on, here's another piece of advice. We strongly suggest that you do not run the specific process called Create Next Year more than once. Every time you run it, you will get another NYR version of each and every track you have. You don't really want to keep duplicating tracks. Now, let's stay here in PowerPoint and talk another minute about this concept of two worlds. Whether you are in SIRS or Schoologic, there is only a single database, happens to be SQL, behind all the work you're doing. The work you do, the changes you make, are stored in this single database. It's important to understand that while most NYR scheduling work is unique unto itself, there are some tables in SQL which are shared between NY Scheduling and what I call regular SIRS or Schoologic. The tables you see listed here, staff, homeroom, room, tracks, course, student, are shared between current year and next year. You never want to go into next year, pick those 3 staff members you know are retiring this coming summer and delete them. Well, why not? Because you will be deleting them from current year as well as next year. Well, why is that? Because staff is shared between the 2 worlds. You can add to any of these areas. But if you wish to not use something that you already have in these areas, either ignore it, or in some cases, you can actually mark things as inactive. So, to review, once you have run Create Next Year in either SIRS or Schoologic, any changes made to these 6 tables apply to both current year and next year. Do not make changes, and by that I basically, but not exclusively, mean deletions. Additions are always okay. But don't delete anything from these 6 areas until after you have run the rollovers next summer. And a quick troubleshooting note for you here. One of the areas that was not showing in the previous slide was templates, scheduling templates. You know how you might create a scheduling template which covers, let's say, period 1 on day 1 and period 1 on day 2. And then any class scheduled with that template meets the first hour of both day 1 and day 2 because it uses that pattern, right? Well, we've seen a number of schools that have gone into next year's scheduling. They mess with those. They mess with those scheduling templates. They edit them. Don't. If you take that scheduling template, which meets hour 1 on both day 1 and day 2, and in next year's scheduler you edit that template so that it meets only on day 2, guess what? In your current year, none of the classes scheduled into that template meet on day 1 anymore. Why? Because when you edit an existing scheduling template in next year, it affects current year. You can add new ones. By all means, add new ones. But this is not the time to delete scheduling templates or to edit them. So, really, my previous slide should have looked like this. The areas that are shared between next year scheduling and current year are staff, homeroom, room, tracks, course, student, and template maintenance. Okay, we are going to pick the scheduling menu. We're going to go to next year scheduling. We're going to actually create next year. Let's go into Schoologic. Here I am. I'm still my middle school person. I'm going to scheduling, and I'm going, as I mentioned, to next year scheduling. That'll take a second. And now that we're in next year scheduling, we have to consider these 3 questions up here on the left. Question number 1. Do I wish to clear course requests? Well, if you used requests last year, they're still in your database. You remember requests, right? Requests can either be one-to-one or one-to-multiple. And by that I mean this. You could have a request called AP Physics. And when the kid asks for that request, that's what he gets. He gets AP Physics. Or you could have a single request tied into multiple courses. When the kid asks for physics, the kid gets Principles of Motion in first semester and Fluid Dynamics in second semester. My advice would be, why clear those out? Why not keep the ones you have and then either modify them as needed or delete individual requests during your NY scheduling process? Question number 2. Clear student requests. This means requests currently stored with your students. In 95% of the free world, we are referring to the requests which got your students into their current courses. Well, why would you not delete those? That's just my opinion, but we don't need those anymore. Kids are in the classes. Question number 3. Do I wish to clear resources? This question applies only to schools which use Master Board Builder. Do not select this choice unless you use that and you are planning a major schedule format change. And by that I mean something like you're currently running a relative day schedule and you plan to move to a fixed day schedule. If both of those conditions are true, check this. They're not true for me, so I'm not going to check those. Now I come down here and I say create next year. And when I say create next year, a big message comes up and it says, holy crumb, are you sure you want to do this? And of course, if I say no, the whole process comes to a scratching halt. So I'm not going to say no, I'm going to say yes, because yes, I am really sure that I want to do this. Now, I've done this in practice, and with this particular database that I'm using, well, actually it's done already. I mean, the fact that default master board popped up, that tells you the process is done. Okay, now, in that very short span of time, your school may take longer. Two very critical things happen. One is the system copied information and moved things around to create the next year environment. And next year tracks were created. Now those two processes are equally important. One of the most common questions that we get in every year in second semester is we have clients who say, I'm getting an error message that my tracks are invalid. Well, whenever I see that message, I know that the process I'm showing you right now is not how the school created next year tracks. For better or worse, mostly for the latter, Schoologic will let you create tracks manually. Don't do it. When you create tracks manually, they never work right. So even if you're a school which does not schedule your students into classes by time of day, you need to do the steps I have shown you so far. Every school needs to do the create next year steps that you've just seen in order to create tracks for next year. Do not create your tracks manually. Hey, Christmas is coming. The kids are getting antsy. Many of us are experiencing the transportation joys which winter storms bring. So I understand there's a lot of distractions out there right now, but I'm telling you, if you remember nothing else from this webinar today, I want you to remember that you must run Create Next Year in order to create your 2015-16 tracks. Do not create tracks manually. If you do, you will surely slide off the road later. Now, back in Schoologic, the process, as I mentioned, is complete. We have new tracks, which I will show you in a minute. We have this new master board to work with called the default master board. By the way, you never want to delete the default master board. Always just leave it there, even though the default master board is blank. A blank board does not contain your current timetable of classes. If you wish to create a radically different schedule from what you have, here's your chance. Further, my advice is you should always have one more master board than you wish to work with at any given time. I feel it's always nice to have another one created that you can fall back on. I've come into some clients next year scheduler, I've come into here, and there's like 9 master boards, okay? Hey, bully for them. It means they're out there creating, they're experimenting, they're trying to figure out what's going to work best for them. So if you wish a clean board, I would say at this point, click Master Boards on the bottom on the right, and then copy the default master board, and it'll take it a second, then it'll say, hey, there's the copy of the default master board. And my advice is I would work from there. And that the default master board is always blank, so you have a clean slate to start from if that's your thing. Now, what I want to show you today is another choice, because I know plenty of you out there do not want to build a 2015-16 schedule that is radically different from your current schedule. You just want to roll your current board forward and maybe edit around the edges a little bit. Let me show you how to do that. To create a master board using your current year as a template, do this. If Masterboards is not already open, you click down here to open it. Step number 2 is down here on the bottom on the left, we're going to say create from current year. And there's a copy now of my current year masterboard. So what does that hold? That holds my current schedule. Okay, everything's copied forward. Okay, and I'm going to just say copy 1 there, and then I'm going to do that again. Okay, and so now I'm going to say this is 1 and this is 2. Okay, and then I advocate that you write this down on a separate piece of paper so you can keep your master board straight, because like I said, some people have as many as 9, and I just went ahead there on the bottom on the right and I clicked submit, and that locks in those master boards. Okay, now what I created here, these bottom 2 guys are my current schedule copied forward. Classes, rooms, and teachers just as they are now. Quiet classrooms they are too, because there's no students in them. By the way, make a mental note, like I mentioned earlier, you don't want to delete the default master board. Nobody ever told me why not to delete the default master board. They just told me you should never delete that. Okay, now let's go look at our tracks, because I promised you that the tracks would be different. Yes, they are. Okay, I now have an NYR version of each and every track that I started with. So I started with 6 tracks, and now I have 12 tracks. I got an NYR version of each and every track. Now some folks will go ahead and they'll change these to actually have the year be part of the name. That's fine, that's optional. NYR pretty much tells you, hey, it's for next year. You know, your nomenclature can be whatever you want, and you can name it one thing now and name it something different later. But as I promised, you now have an NYR version of every track. Now just a little side note here. Remember how we messed around a minute ago in NY scheduling? We created multiple master boards. We got like 4 of them in there now. Yet the create track mechanism only fired once. We created only 1 set of NYR tracks, and that's how it works. When you go in and create next year, that action, where I clicked on create next year, that action creates 1 NYR track for each of the tracks that I had in current year. After you do that, you can create as many doggone master boards as you care to. The tracks are done, they're duplicated, they're ready to go. By the way, when the system created the 2015-2016 tracks, they used the same dates from 14-15. Okay? They just used next year's version of this year's dates. Now, if those are not quite right, okay, for term 1, which is my first semester, September to November, November to January, my second semester, January to March, April to June, okay, if those aren't right, I can go correct them right now. But wait, the guys and gals on your school board probably have not finalized the dates for next year. You know what? The dates could be corrected now, but they don't have to be. Okay? It really doesn't matter until you do the rollover, and be honest with you, you can even change those dates after the rollovers this summer. What's important the rest of this school year is that the number of terms, I've got 2 terms, and the number of report periods, I have 2 report periods in each term, is correct. That's what matters. If you need to adjust those for 2015-16, adjust them now, so that when you start working on the schedule, they're correct. For example, if you're going to go to trimesters, you currently have obviously 2 semesters here. If you're going to go to trimesters, now's the time to edit your tracks. Make sure that when you edit something like that, you only edit next year's track. You don't want to edit this year's track. Okay? And remember, in next year's track, it's not the specific dates that matter. It's the number of terms and the number of report periods. The reason I emphasize the number of terms and the number of report periods is because that's what the schedulers on your staff, either yourselves or some other lucky people, actually work with. Classes get scheduled into X number of terms. They don't get scheduled to specific dates. Now, the other thing you can do anytime at all is you can edit the days, you can edit the periods, you can edit anything else about your track. So here I am, I've got daily periods, right? In this particular school, I have 2 daily attendance periods. If I was a high school, I'd probably have more. I could edit those anytime I want. Here's my periods for that particular track. These are the periods into which classes get scheduled, okay? These other ones are the periods in which I'm taking attendance, because I'm only taking twice daily attendance. I set that up on the track, by the way. And I've got days, right? I've got a 2-day relative days schedule. If I'm going to change that, maybe next year I'm going to go to 5-day relative, or I'm going to go to 5-day fixed schedule. Whatever it is I'm going to do next year, now's the time to change it in the tracks. And then, of course, the calendar itself, which mainly controls attendance, you can edit that anytime you want. You don't need to edit that now. And again, you probably can't edit that now because your school board probably has yet to make a determination on what next year's schedule is going to be. Once you have the tracks created, and remember, district, often called board, users have no access to next year's scheduling. So everything I've shown you so far has to be performed by a school user. Most of our clients can continue to have the school users own this next step too. In fact, we recommend that you want school users to work on this next step. But I must first tell you about 3 things, okay? So let's go back in here into actual Schoologic. And what I want you to see in Schoologic is I want you to see that in working on those tracks, right? I made one track, NYR made one track for each of them, right? I've got those created. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I got to kind of get out of where I am, which is I'm in next year's scheduling. So that's just what kind of threw me, because I wasn't getting the menus I wanted. Now I'm in current year, okay, and that's why it kind of threw me there, because I wasn't seeing the menus I really needed to see. What I need to see here is I'm going to go to the setup menu and I'm going to pick next year tracks, grades, and statuses. Okay, now particularly at smaller districts, a district or a board user can come in here and they can handle this screen. If you only have 3, 4, 5 schools, board user could come in here and do this. They are going to see, by the way, every track at every school. Okay, so that's why I say if you have more than a couple, 3 schools, this gets a little daunting. Okay, it's hard to keep everything straight, but you could do it if you didn't have many. For a district much bigger than that, we suggest having a school user do this. However, if you work at a school from which students will move to another school in your district, a school operator can only do so much with those transferring kids, and I'll show that. In a perfect world, our best practice suggestion is this. You want the next year tracks, grades, and statuses screen to be completed from the lower grades to the higher grades. In other words, elementaries should work on this screen first, then middle schools, then, the high schools. Okay? Here's why. A receiving school, middle schools receive kids from elementaries, right? High schools receive kids from junior highs or middle schools. A receiving school cannot access their lowest grade of next year's students until the sending school creates that opportunity. Let me show you what I mean. We're in a middle school, right? Notice that these tracks are only current year tracks. I see my current year 6th graders, my current year 7th graders, my current year 8th graders. What I don't see is next year's 6th graders. Why? because they're currently fifth graders at the elementary, and the elementary people haven't filled out this form yet. I need the elementary people to fill this form out, and I specifically need them to take their fifth graders and say, you know what? The NY school, the next year's school for my fifth graders is the middle school. That's the action that's going to make those kids available to me in the middle school. Now, interestingly, when those kids do show up, they will not have a track because tracks are school owned. The elementary people can say, you're going to be in sixth grade next year. They can say, you're going to be at the middle school next year, but they can't put those kids in a track because the middle school owns a track. Now, the first question many of you are going to ask, well, Al, we got a big district. We cannot oversee this really orderly process that you describe where first your elementaries do it, then your middle schools do it, then your high schools do it. Al, in the real world, it's not going to happen that way. Okay, great. That's fine. Well, what happens if the high school fills out this form before the middle school? Two choices. You got two choices to deal with that. One is, once you see the other ninth grade, if you're high school, or if you're middle school, once you see the other sixth grade, if you will, okay, the school operator can redo this form. But, and I'm getting a little ahead of myself here because we actually cover this later, but I'll let you in on the way it works. If you leave anything blank, like you got two grades here, right? You'll do all three grades the first time around. Then the new kids come in and you decide you're going to redo it from this form. If you miss a grade level, then here's what happens. When you miss the grade level, those kids previously had valid information. Now they're going to have blank because you left their information blank the second time around, and blank overwrote the valid information. So if you choose to run this form a second time, that's fine, that's within the rules, but you must fill out all of the form. Now, the other way to fix those kids, right? They're fifth graders now, they're going to be sixth graders. The other way to fix them is through Global Update, because what you probably really only need to fix with them is their track. Okay, so let's go into Global Update. You guys have probably used this somewhere along the line. Global Update, I come in here and I pick track. And then every kid that's selected over here gets in the track I pick for them to have. I want them to have NYR track. Okay, not going to happen unless I pay some particular attention to my group manager. Now the problem, the tricky part of this in group manager is there's no good way to select just those incoming sixth graders, because if I pick next year's students, I don't get only the incoming sixth graders, I get the seventh graders and eighth graders that are holdovers. And there's this thing called pre-registered students, but I believe that that's a category that's not quite ready for prime time. So you might have to come up with a user-defined group in order to make this fly. But using Global Update is actually simpler probably than trying to rerun this whole form when you consider the fact that if you mess up the form, you're going to overwrite good data with blank data. Now, just let me start on this form by telling you a couple more truths here. This form must be completed in order to make students available for your scheduling process. If you don't do this, the scheduling process will not actually see the kids. Okay? Now, as I alluded to a bit ago, this page will always default to blank values, even if the process was previously completed. That's one of the reasons you want to only have one operator per building working on this. Okay, that's huge. It's entirely possible to have your building secretary come in, she submits the correct answers for the entire building, she hits submit down here, And then later, the building principal comes in and he fills out maybe only 2 of the 3 grade levels. And then he hits submit. Well, what just happened? The grade level that he didn't fill in, let's pretend it's the 8th graders, they used to have valid information. When he fails to fill in anything at all for them, blank overwrites valid, and now they get nothing. That's why we recommend having only one person from each building mess with this page. Okay? If you mess this up, that one person can certainly go back and resubmit the page, but they must fill in all of the track's info. You can't leave one track blank if everybody else was previously submitted. We would suggest that if more than a couple days have passed, you probably should not edit your students here. You probably should go use Global Update. Your best strategy for errors made here is Global Update to fix students. From this form, which you're looking at right now, here's the strategy we strongly recommend. If a track of students is returning to your building next year, building operators should fill in almost all the blanks they see here. So for a track that's returning next year, my 6th graders are going to return next year. They're going to be continuously enrolled. We're not going to fill in out status. We'll explain that in a minute. We're going to give them, 6th graders are going to become 7th graders next year. They're going to be in the 7th grade track next year. And by the way, they're going to be in my building. If a track of students is leaving you permanently, and by permanently I mean leaving the district, not just your building. I'm talking here about graduation from your highest grade level. For most of you, that's going to be high school seniors. Building operators should only fill out the NYR out status. And we're going to say, hey, they graduated. If a track of students is leaving your building, but they're staying within your district, maybe they're moving from a junior high to a high school, building operators should fill in every field you can about them. Every field you can about them. And let personnel at the receiving school finish the job. Specifically, the other building, the receiving building, is going to have to fill in the track. You can fill in the grade level. These are 8th graders. They're going to be 9th graders next year. They're going to graduate to OHS, our high school. We don't know the track, but we do know the building. It's going to be the high school. Okay? We don't know what their status will be at the fall of next year. What in status will the high school use? Now, in this particular school, I can say enrolled from our middle school. But at some installations, a building person will not actually have access to a high school enrollment code because they're a building person at the middle school. Okay. Specifically, the receiving school will always fill in NYR track because NYR track is owned by the receiving school, not by the middle school. I really don't mean to be confusing here. We'll talk about these 3 groupings of students again over the next few minutes. As we consider this form, though, we do want to incorporate a concrete example of kids leaving your building but staying within your district. That's these 8th graders, right? They are leaving my building but staying within my district. So let's look at those 8th graders who this spring will graduate from my middle school and they'll move on to become 9th graders at our high school. Let's review these 5 columns of choices for them. NYR in status. Now this means what status do I have when I grow into the fall? Next fall, what is my status going into school? So you can see my 6th graders and my 7th graders, they're going to just have continuous registration. Okay? They're just staying with me. The 8th graders who are leaving my building, in some installs, I will be able to give them the code the next building wants. In other installs, I won't. For my 8th graders, I've got enrolled from our middle school. So I realize you guys, no matter how close your eyes are to your monitors, you can't always see what I'm doing here. Okay? Now, despite the fact, let's look at the next column, which is NYR out status. Now, despite the fact that somebody in my development team made the terminology look the same here, it's really not the same. In column 1, it says NYR in status. And I told you that means next year's in status. Well, then we come along here to column 2 and it says NYR out status. The verbiage looks the same. It begins NYR, and that would suggest to me, if I had not been trained in this, that my choice here for out status would apply to next year. After all, it says NYR, right? But here in column 2, this is the only part of the whole chart that applies to this year. So when you see NYR out status, what it really means is, how is the student closing out this year? What do I want her out status to be in May or June of 2015, the end of my present school year? So for 8th graders, I'm going to choose graduated to our high school. I suspect that most students, most of the time, will have something else like no diploma, continuing, or whatever. Frankly, if your kid is staying in your building, you can leave NYR out status blank. Okay, what's the next one? Grade level. Grade level is pretty self-explanatory. You advance them 1 year, right? 6th graders become 7th graders, 7th graders become 8th graders, 8th graders become 9th graders. Now, keep in mind, we're just setting up the defaults, which in a few minutes we will apply to all of our students. It's still the 2014-15 school year. We're not even halfway done yet. Don't worry about the kids who might potentially be held back a grade. We are not going to worry about them yet. We can always move them back, even after rollovers this summer. What we are doing now is moving kids into where we expect them to be next year. We need them to be in next year's grade and in next year's buildings so that we can plan and schedule for next year. The handful of kids who might get held back can always be edited later. Now, column number 4, NYR track, which is very interesting. Here you choose which track your students should be moved into for next year. My 6th graders are going to be in the 7th grade track. My 7th graders are going to be in the 8th grade track. My 8th graders are going to be in a track I can't control. I'm the middle school operator. I can't control the NYR track. Only the high school people can. So as I said earlier, we recommend that school operators rather than district operators should own this process. The school people go in once, just once per school, and they fill out this chart for the tracks that are currently in their building, except for the grade level that is graduating from their building. And then at some later point, the receiving school will go in and probably use Global Update, or also use this form, to assign students to the proper track for next year. This applies, of course, only to the students who are changing buildings but staying within your district. You know, I got so caught up with that business, I almost forgot here on column number 5, NYR school. NYR school is pretty self-explanatory. What school will members of this track attend next year? 6th graders are going to be in the middle school next year. 7th graders are going to be in the middle school next year. 8th graders are going to be in the high school next year. Remember, this step right here is the one which makes the graduating 8th graders available to the high school so they can start planning. I mean, make them available right now in December. It does not move them. It does not change their status. It just makes them available to the folks who are working on the high school scheduling. So once I have this all created, done the way I want it, I would click Submit, and that would make these changes. Okay, I'm not going to do that. In fact, I'm going to actually log out of Schoologic. In the real world, like I said, I would just click Submit and I'd move on. What I want to do right now is I want to move out, because the next stuff I want to show you, I want to be the high school principal. Now, let's review. There are 3 groups of students for which you will fill out the next year tracks, grades, and statuses. There are students who are remaining in your school. There are students who will leave your school but stay in your district, and there are students who will leave your school and also leave your district. meaning the highest grade level in your district, usually high school seniors. So, for kids who are remaining in your school, you want them to have an in status for next year. They're remaining in your school, you're going to have something like continuous registration, okay? Something similar to that. Give them a grade for next year, give them a track for next year, and their school for next year is your school. They're remaining, okay? Students who leave your school for a school within your district, for instance, kids going from junior high school to high school, you're going to give them an out status. This is the status for them leaving your building this coming spring. You're going to give them a next year grade. If they're currently 8th graders, they're going to be 9th graders next year. And most importantly, you are going to give them a next year school, because that intake school needs you to complete this step so they are available to the intake school to work with. What about those high school seniors? They're leaving your school. They're also leaving your district. You go into NYR out status. That's all they need. A graduation code. Boom, they're gone. Now, the rest of today's webinar is going to broaden a little bit. What I'm going to say the rest of today may not affect each and every one of you. But, because some of you are district employees, some of you are building employees, some of you are directly involved in scheduling, some are not. But I have a handful of points and best practices I'd like to cover before the top of the hour. I want to start with a little quick troubleshooting here. I want to advise you to resist the temptation to display your NYR fields, or any field for that matter, in more than one place on your student demographic screens in Schoologic. SIRS users usually don't have the choice of determining which fields display on which forms, but in Schoologic you do have that choice. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Here we are in Schoologic. I'm the principal of a high school. Okay, now a couple years back we gave you a new screen. If I go to the student menu and I say demographics next year's screen, okay, that gets me to this screen right here. So like I said, it's only been around a couple years. Okay, we designed one specific form on which you can keep all of your next what year information fields. Now if I go to the student menu and I pick demographics, and in this particular school district, I need this to build in here for a second, I'm going to pick student page 2. Check this out. NYR grade, NYR school, NYR track, NYR homeroom. Okay, what this particular district has done is they're choosing to display these 4 pieces of information in 2 places. They've chosen to put it on this card here, and of course we put it on this display. Now, here's the problem with that. Believe it or not, there is no guarantee that if you change the information in one spot, it will get changed in both of them. There's no guarantee that'll happen. So we recommend any piece of information in student demographics only be displayed on the one location. Well, well, well. What else can we talk about? What else can we do this month to help our scheduling efforts work more smoothly in the coming months? If we go into next year's scheduler and we look at setup, and I'll just do this in our heads, okay? One of the things we didn't talk about was rooms, okay? Now remember, those tables I talked about in SQL, rooms and staff, those 2 items are shared between the 2 years. You cannot delete a room or you cannot delete a staff member from next year without having the system delete them from current year. So it's fine with staff and room, and the same is true of courses. It's fine to add to those, but you can't delete items from room, staff, or courses from next year. Now a frequent question we get is, how do we recommend that new teachers are added? When you have that situation where you know you're going to get a new staff member, but you are literally months away from hiring them? Well, Doug Robertson, our scheduling guru, many of you worked with over the years, he told me this. He said go in and create the teacher and give them new as a first name and the department name as a last name. If you get more than one science teacher, number them. Okay, not that hard. Okay, and then you go ahead and schedule, right? And new science is going to get some biology classes, whatever classes the teacher gets. Then when the real person gets hired, you type their real first name instead of new, you type their real last name instead of science, and they already have a schedule generated for them. It's already there for them. It's way cool. Okay, hey, let's go look at requests for a minute in the real software. That's not requests. Let's go here. Okay, let's go into, I'm the principal of the high school, right? I'm going to go into next year's scheduling. I'm going to wait a second for that to come up. No, really, I want next year's scheduling. There we go. If I go to setup and I go to requests, okay, you remember requests? I mean, first of all, they roll over from year to year, and the basic question you want to answer here is, are they still accurate? If a student asks for advanced composition, do you still want them to get advanced comp semester 1 and advanced comp semester 2? Look at this last item on the request form over here, inactive. You know, you have to say no in order to get this request to show up as being available to students. This is a little hard to follow, I'll readily admit, but my buddies over in development chose to word the screen this way, not maybe the choice I would have made. If we do not want this request to be available, we say yes, because we're saying yes to the fact we want it to be inactive. If we say no here, then it is not inactive, which means, of course, it is in play. For example, if you were like my high school and you only taught Latin every other year, you could come in and turn this request on in the years you're going to offer Latin and turn it off in the years you're not going to offer it. Now, let me show you some functionality that not everybody knows about. And frankly, I don't know why everybody doesn't use this. Check this out. We're going to create a new tab here, and we're going to go into Home Logic. Give it a second for Home Logic to come up. It says we're waiting for a response, so it heard me. Okay, great. We're going to be student. Okay. I wanted to show you this screen in Home Logic. Let's go to course requests. Okay. Now, I'm a 10th grader right now. I happen to be. Tell you that. Okay. I can make my own course requests in Home Logic, and the people who are running this scheduling process will receive them in School Logic. Okay, I wanted to show you this screen because this is the most efficient way, in my humble opinion, for your school district to get requests in for next year. You get the students and the parents to do it. You set up rules. Over here on the left-hand side of the screen, we are requiring that a person must make at least 5 requests. So you could set up a minimum number. You could set up a minimum number of credits. You can set up a minimum number of course units. Okay, I've already been through this process once. That's why you see some saved requests over here. Okay, these rules, by the way, get set up in another piece of our products that not everybody knows about, Logic Admin. Logic Admin controls what goes on in Teacher Logic and what goes on in Home Logic. I can require the students to meet these various requirements when they are requesting courses. Now, maybe I'm a parent or a student and I don't know what advanced metal fabricating and manufacturing really gets me. Well, it turns out it gets me semester 1 and semester 2 of that class. How did I get there? I just hovered over it. Now, if I don't know what the class itself is, look at the description there in the middle. It says you will work, let's see what it says. It says you will work on the replacement for the space shuttle. Now, where the heck is that coming from? Let's go back to School Logic. Let's go to courses. Oh, got bummed out here, high school. Got logged out. It's a great thing doing these things live. What was that? That was advanced metal fabricating, right? If I go to information 2, look at this. You will work on the replacement for the space shuttle. That's in the comment box. So you can create, we had one school that created like their whole school catalog, and they printed off all these comments, and that's how they had a catalog to give to the parents. Well, that's nice, but it's paper, right? If I enter the comment here, it shows up on my course request screen here when I'm actually making my choices. Pretty cool, eh? Now, once I meet my minimums over here, right? I can go ahead and click next, and it takes me to this second screen in which I can pick alternate requests. So if I don't get anatomy, physiology, what else would I want instead of that? I can ask for the course to be in specific terms. You know, maybe it's a course that's only one semester and it's offered both semesters, and I say I'd really rather have it second semester. And I can even request specific staff members. Now, this whole page is optional, okay? You can, in admin, Logic Admin, you can set it up that the parents and students never see this page, because a lot of schools are not comfortable allowing kids to actually request staff members, and I can kind of relate to that. So then if you click next, it saves the request and it goes on here to step number 3, and a kid can verify what they've asked for. Okay, I think that's pretty cool. I don't know why like all my customers don't use that. Okay, so there's some thoughts on requests. Hey, everybody take a breath. Those were the basics of how to set yourself up now so that scheduling gets more smooth. It's easier for you to do later. Let's review. What did we talk about today? Well, we created next year. That creates the tracks and the master boards. We emphasized using that process to make NYR tracks. Do not make NYR tracks manually. We discussed issues arising from having 2 years but only one database. Remember, I showed you there's 6 or 7 tables that are shared between NYR and current year. And if you go into NYR and you delete teachers, I guarantee you they will be deleted from current year, and that usually leads to bad things. We discussed next year tracks, grades, and statuses at length. We talked about editing, adding rooms, teachers. We looked at some course requests. We looked at how parents and students can make requests in Home Logic, which I think is way cool. As I said at the outset, for this calendar year, our webinar series is riding into the sunset. We will be back after the holiday break with more of these fun-filled, action-packed hours. Until then, you will be able to replay this webinar and all of our other efforts on our community pages, community.schoollogic.com. You know the way. Thank you so much for attending. All of us at School Logic wish you a happy, restful holiday season. A final point before I go, I should let you know that our offices will be closed December 25, 26, and January 1. We will have limited resources, which is corporate speak for most of us will be out of the office, between December 22 and January 2. I hope you will be out of your office that same time period. Again, thanks for dropping by. Thank you so very, very much for attending. Happy holidays.